Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. In this episode of AoE2 Campaigns vs. History, we're going to take a look at one of the classics, the Vinlandsagas. These sagas tell the story of how an outlawed Eric the Red set in motion events that would ultimately lead to not just the Norse colonization of Greenland, but also the first European visit and attempted settlement of America, 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Of course, Columbus had a good excuse, in that he wasn't born for over 400 years of that time, but I still think he steals a little bit more thunder than he should for the many Norse men and women that beat him to the punch. Upon the Norse arriving in the New World, they encountered on the one hand better climate and more abundant resources than they could have imagined, while on the other hand, interactions with the native inhabitants went sideways almost immediately. How close we were to an Icelandic-speaking America today is of course speculation, but in this video we're going to look back at the Age of Empires campaign mission, which attempts to tell the story. The first obvious question though is, what are the Vinland Sagas? These are two Icelandic sagas called the Greenlandsaga and the Saga of Eric the Red, which tell us slightly different versions of the same underlying story. The events occur from 975 to around 1030 AD, though weren't written until at least 150 and probably more like 200 years after the events. They feature mostly the same story and characters, albeit disagreeing with each other on some details and even a few very basic points, like who discovered Vinland. In fact, there's enough ambiguity that it isn't even clear where exactly on the east coast of North America they're calling Vinland, though Newfoundland, Canada is a common interpretation. A major reason for that is we straight up found a settlement of 8 Norse buildings at a site called Lanso Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Archaeologists specifically went looking there thanks to the sagas and Icelandic maps, which is pretty cool. The most modern dating puts the wood for the buildings being chopped at 1021, landing within the timeline of the sagas. From the sagas alone, with their description of locations and the natives, it was very clear they made it to North America already, even without the discovery of the physical settlement, though that obviously confirmed it definitively. So with that, let's start off by recapping the scenario in case you haven't played it in a while, which you find is a standalone mission in the miscellaneous collection titled Battles of the Conquerors. Things start out with Eric the Red in Scandinavia. There's a bit of an animal control problem with some wolves and one aggressive deer in particular, but Eric and his posse are pretty effective animal bylaw. Your first side mission is to then raid Britain, as you are still Vikings technically in the Viking Age at the time, though are closer to the tail end of that. It's a bit of a missed opportunity to have you raiding monasteries, but you raid some markets to build up your gold and pay for an army to go find the New World. You then sail northwest, past where Iceland should be, but doesn't exist in the scenario, landing on the east coast of Greenland. You are forced that way, as your ships are destroyed if you try to sail around the southern tip. You then fight your way west, past castles and a ton of Viking units from an already established hostile Greenland colony, building a new fleet on the west side of Greenland, sailing down to Vinland with Eric the Red in tow, and then fight the native Skraelings. Your tech level is so far ahead that it's not that hard of a fight, and you then win the scenario by establishing a small colony. The closing narration alludes to years of suffering trying to establish your settlement, and if you know anything about North American history, you'll know they were obviously unsuccessful. So how accurate is this? Well, let's just say you would fail a history quiz if this was your study guide. That is, unless the teacher also played AoE2 as their lesson prep. Now let's talk about how the sagas actually play out, admittedly cutting some of the details and blending the two sagas for cohesion. Both sagas agree the story begins with Eric the Red growing up on the west coast of Norway, and the campaign is so far so good, as that's where you start. His father then kills someone for reasons we don't know, and the family has to get out of Dodge, running to the Mexican border style, which in this case involves running away to Iceland. Iceland, of course, doesn't exist in the scenario, so already you can see the quiz you studied for by playing AoE2 is off to a rough start. He also doesn't visit the British Isles in the sagas at all, and that little side quest is completely invented. His father then dies in Iceland, Eric marries, and has a son named Leif, which is often mispronounced Leif, though that would be the feminine version of the name. Eric's probably a farmer at this point, though you get the sense he has something of a magnetic personality, as he always seems to be able to recruit allies when he gets into scuffs, which happens pretty frequently. At one point, Eric's thrall causes a landslide that damages a neighbor's farm, and his neighbor kills Eric's slave. So Eric deals out some frontier justice and kills the farmer and 2 other people who backed him up. It's some real John Wick stuff. That gets him banished for disturbing the peace, so he moves to the far west side of Iceland. Eric then lends out his furniture to a new neighbor while he builds his new house, but the neighbor won't return the furniture later, so he breaks into the guy's house and steals it back. A fight ensues and Eric kills him and a few other people, with a bit of help. At this point, I have to interject. If you get into one duel to the death with a neighbor, maybe that's on them. But when you get into a duel to the death with every neighbor you have, then maybe you're the problem. Either way, Erik is banished from Iceland entirely for 3 years, which is a fairly light sentence, all things considered. Again, speaking to that personal magnetism though, he gets a crew together and they all decide they're going to explore based on some rumored sightings of a land to the west. Spoiler, it's Greenland. There was an earlier attempt to explore it by someone else that ended in complete disaster. It's a dangerous trip, though like a conservative on Reddit, he's running out of places he hasn't banned. Erik, along with his family and crew, sail northwest and come across the east coast of Greenland, which he thinks is too inhospitable, perhaps learning from reports about the last disastrous attempt to get a foothold there. So he sails around the southern tip and up the west coast, where he stays for 3 winters, waiting out his banishment. After 3 years, he goes back to Iceland and tells everybody about what he's now naming Greenland. Now, this is explicitly a clickbait title, and both sagas straight up say that. You think clickbait is something YouTubers invented, but Erik perfected it 1,000 years earlier. After a bit of time bombarding Icelanders with videos about how amazing Greenland is and how they're all going to be rich, he gets a good number of potential colonists to join him. Is this an Australia situation where we're shipping all the criminals out to an island, or is this a surviving Mars situation where he's carefully weeding out all the candidates, leaving behind the whiners and hypochondriacs the sagas don't tell us? What we know is he gets 25 ships worth of settlers from Iceland that depart to colonize Greenland, and on that trip 11 sink or are forced back to Iceland. The other 14 are even less lucky, and they make it to Greenland, where they live now. Like those earliest settlers, the scenario designer then falls for Erik's propaganda and has Greenland filled with massive forests and being the place you have to go for resources once you run out in Scandinavia. Whereas in reality, Greenland has one natural forest in a very small valley, and the rest is almost entirely glaciers, at least as of 2025. The areas in summer near the coast that aren't glaciers are then rocky tundra at best, so the scenario designer covering it all in trees is again just falling for Erik's marketing tactics. From the initial wave of settlers, there ended up being 2 distinct colonies. The eastern settlement, confusingly in the southwest corner, and the settlement directly to its north, equally confusingly called the western settlement. The early Greenlanders were nothing if not terrible at naming things. On a slightly darker note, and spoilers ahead, not only do the Vikings fail to permanently settle America, but the original Greenland settlements were eventually wiped out or abandoned as well during the Little Ice Age around 1400. And Greenland was colonized a second time by Europeans in the 1700s. At this point in the story, there's a new character introduced named Bjarni, who attempts to go from Iceland to Greenland, but gets lost and ends up in America, perhaps in the Newfoundland or Nova Scotia region. He realizes he's not in Greenland and follows the coast north, but doesn't make landfall along the way, despite his crew wanting to, and being a little upset with his lack of curiosity. Eventually, and this is the part that surprises me, he manages to find his way to one of the Greenland settlements where he's never been before and tells people about what he saw of the new world, at least from his vantage point on his ship. The Vinlandsaga says people are a bit judgmental toward Bjarni, where it's seen as very odd behavior for Norsemen to have zero curiosity in that situation and not attempt at all to explore. After this, he settles down on a pasture in Greenland, and it seems like the farming life is enough for good old Bjarni. Not everyone in the 24th century has to sign up for Starfleet, and not everyone is a natural-born explorer. I should note this is all the Greenlandsaga is telling, whereas in Erik the Red saga, Erik's son Leif visits Norway and is sent by the King of Norway to convert the new Greenland colony to Christianity. It's on his trip back that he gets lost and accidentally lands in the New World. Poor Bjarni gets written out entirely from Erik's saga, and credit is all given to Leif, though my understanding is this is universally considered by scholars to be a later fabrication and Bjarni erasure. Back to Greenlandsaga, while Leif doesn't discover Vinland, he hears about it from Bjarni and decides he wants to check it out, as Leif would definitely sign up for Starfleet and has the explorer gene. He buys Bjarni's boat and gets a crew together, also asking his dad Erik the Red to come. Erik initially agrees to go, but falls off his horse just as he's about to reach the boat, which is considered a very bad omen, so Erik stays behind, never actually going to the New World. This is a huge departure from the scenario, where one of your 2 core missions is to have Erik get there, so Leif technically fails to complete the objectives laid out in AoE2. And again, I hate to say it, but we're probably scoring nothing but zeros on this quiz. Leif captains the ship, and keeping in mind he only knows how to get to the New World from what Bjarni's told him, takes Bjarni's route in reverse, first encountering what's probably Baffin Island, calling it Helleland, which translates to Stone Slab Land, and considers it worthless. They then find another heavily wooded land called Markland, which is probably Labrador, and then a while later reach Vinland, which is maybe Newfoundland, though some people think Vinland might actually be technically a bit further south. Vinland literally means wine or grapeland, where the sagas tell us the dew on the grass is the sweetest thing they ever tasted, and they found abundant salmon, larger than any they'd seen before. Leif and his crew built some houses at a location they like, possibly at Lanso Meadows, though the timing here doesn't perfectly line up with the buildings we've found, as those seem to be built about 20 years after, so are maybe from a later expedition. Wherever exactly Leif landed, he loaded up their ship with everything they could carry and sailed back to Greenland, rescuing some shipwrecked Norsemen just before they get home, after which Leif is given the nickname Leif the Lucky. Here they also pick up a notable character named Gudrid, who sticks around for the rest of the story. Over that winter, disease breaks out and Eric the Red dies, again before even first contact with Native Americans, while the scenario then forces you to have him right there on the front lines battling. Also, note that's the second scenario mission failed in real life, though asking Eric the Red to literally never die might have been an unfair objective. Eric's second oldest son, Thorvald, then buys the same boat from Leif. We'll use some pictures here I grabbed online from coloring books to help keep better track of characters, though try to restrain yourself from coloring on your screen. He sails to Vinland the next year, and this time stays over winter, where they have their first encounter with the native Skraelings, and attempt to kill one on sight, though one escapes. That night they're attacked, where in Greenland sagas, Thorvald takes a Native American arrow to the armpit and dies, whereas in Eric's saga, Thorvald also dies, but is killed by a mythical one-legged uniped and is shot in the groin, but the outcome is the same. The rest of the crew go back to Greenland with the unsettling news that colonization may meet more resistance than anticipated. Enter the third son of Eric, Thorstein Erikson, who by now has married the very same Gudrid that Leif saved on the way back from his first trip. Thorstein decides that it's his turn to go to the New World, and buys the same old reliable ship everyone's been using they got from Bjarni the Happy Farmer, and sets sail with Gudrid and a crew, but they get blown back to Greenland. He then dies of the plague, and his now dead corpse gives an impressively long message to Gudrid about her future. It's one of those moments that reminds you this is a saga intended for Icelanders in the 1200s and not a history textbook, as the saga acts like this is totally normal. A footnote in the translation I'm reading notes that Icelanders at the time thought corpses could talk after death, so no one would have been concerned by this. Another guy from Norway named Thorfinn Karlsefni then marries the now widowed Gudrid. The two of them get the largest crew yet of 65 people, including women this time, and attempt to more permanently colonize Vinland. Once there, they meet the Skraelings, and this time things go better at first, and they start trading, in particular receiving furs in exchange for giving the natives milk and red cloth. What the natives really want to barter for are the Norse's more advanced weapons, but Thorfinn tells his men not to trade those, and shortly after that, one of Thorfinn's men kills a Skraeling he says was reaching for one. The natives run away, but all hell is about to break loose. The Norse are then attacked by a much larger group of natives, and despite being settlers, not soldiers, the Norsemen manage to fight them off. Both sides take losses, and the Norse settlers conclude it's too dangerous to stay, deciding it's just safer to hunt polar bears and lick lichen off the rocks of Greenland than try to colonize the New World. In fairness, while their weaponry was superior, it's not like they were showing up with muskets here, and trying to brute force a settlement with the small numbers back on Greenland probably wouldn't have been possible. I should really note a major divergence between the sagas here, as Eric also has a daughter named Freydis, and in one of the sagas she's pregnant in the camp and comes out of her tent while the Skraelings are attacking. She chastises the Norsemen for being wussies, and as she's surrounded by native warriors, picks up a sword from a dead companion, opens her top, and smacks her bare breast with the sword, which scares away the natives, and that's how the Norse survive the attack. For contrast, in Vinlandsaga, she's just straight up evil and schemes to have a bunch of innocent fellow Norsemen killed so she won't have to share the profits of the expedition. When her crew kill the men but hesitate to kill the Norse women, she kills the Norse women herself, while then isn't involved in saving them from the natives attacking. Freydis is just a completely different character in each saga. If you're reading these for the smut, you are going to be disappointed, but Eric's saga turns into horny fanfic for about one paragraph, while the Greenland saga is just a straight up character hit piece. Either way, the core story is the same in each saga. Eric leads the first successful colonization of Greenland, followed by various trips to the New World by his 4 children, having escalating encounters with the natives, which eventually leads to them abandoning the New World. Contrast that with the AoE2 mission, which is basically Eric the Red doing everything himself and having to battle his way across a somehow already inhabited Greenland, as well as land in the New World like he's storming the beaches of Normandy. That said, there are great aspects to the scenario. When you defeat the Greenlanders and they reveal the Sea of Worms, it's a very nice touch, with a cool dragon outline being revealed in the water. In a gameplay sense, it forces you to follow the intended route through Greenland, as your boats are destroyed by trying to pass through the dragon outline. But it also references a passage in Erik's Saga, where it talks about maggots, or in other translations calling them worms, eating through the hull of one of the boats as it travels just south of Greenland. For the most part though, it's clear the scenario isn't trying very hard to recreate the sagas, and it's not even totally clear if the designer had read them. I mean, the fact Leif isn't even mentioned, and you can recruit a penguin in Greenland, tells you how seriously they take the whole thing. A more accurate depiction of the story is in Victors and Vanquish called Karlsefni, and is a remaster of Valhalla's Edge scenario by Filthy Delphia. It tells the same story, but actually includes Iceland, an uncolonized Greenland, and a more challenging landing in Vinland. For nostalgia's sake though, of course our focus here was on the Conqueror's mission. Even without getting every detail right, it's still a classic, and outside of an anime covering the Vinland sagas, they receive surprisingly little press and pop culture, despite how popular Vikings are and how incredible the story is, with archaeological evidence to back up its major claim. For many people, the Age of Empires campaign may be the closest they get to the sagas, so I'm glad they went out of their way to include them, especially considering it finally broke me out of my campaign versus history slumber. That'll do it for this one though. Big thanks to Samantha, James, Woodruff, Jared2142, Shawarma Rider, Sidon Shaw, and everyone else on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.